The water was still warm from the afternoon sun when my sister Claire grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the dock. "You need to leave," she said, her voice cutting through the laughter of my cousins splashing in the lake. "This is a family gathering. And honestly, Sarah, you don't really belong here anymore." I stood there in my old swimsuit, the one I'd worn to this same lake house every summer for 23 years, watching as my entire family pretended not to hear her. My mother continued arranging fruit on the picnic table. My father kept grilling burgers, the smoke rising between us like a wall. My brother Mark actually turned his back to me, focusing intently on his beer as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Claire, I drove 4 hours to be here," I said quietly, but she was already walking away, her designer cover-up flowing behind her like a victory flag. "The invitation was a mistake," she called over her shoulder. "Mom meant to send it to your address by accident. We talked about it. This weekend is for real family only." Real family. The words hit me like cold water. I was the adopted one. The one they'd brought home when I was 6 months old. The one who'd never quite fit their mold despite trying for over 2 decades. But I never imagined they'd actually say it out loud here, in front of everyone. My cousin Jessica giggled from the water. "Maybe you can find a nice hotel in town, Sarah. There's probably a Motel 6 or something." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. I looked around at these people I'd called family my entire life, waiting for anyone to tell Claire she was wrong, to remind her that I'd helped pay for the groceries and the cooler, that I'd driven here straight from my nursing shift at the hospital, that I'd been coming to this lake house since before some of these cousins were even born. No one spoke. I walked to my car in that terrible quiet, my bare feet burning on the gravel driveway. Behind me, I heard the conversation resume, lighter now, as if removing me had lifted some invisible weight from their shoulders. Someone turned up the music. Someone else called for more ice. The party continued without missing a beat. As I reached for my car door, I heard footsteps on the gravel. An elderly man was walking toward me from the neighboring property, his weathered hands holding a set of keys that caught the late afternoon light. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice gentle but firm. I couldn't help but overhear what just happened over there. I wiped my eyes quickly, embarrassed that a stranger had witnessed my humiliation. "I'm sorry if we were too loud. I was just leaving." He studied my face for a long moment, then looked back toward the lake house where my family's laughter echoed across the water. "That's the Henderson place, isn't it? Been renting it out for, 15 years now." I nodded, confused. "My family rents it every summer. Same week, same house. It's tradition." The old man smiled, but there was something sad in his eyes. "Well, miss, I think there's something you should know. I'm Robert Chen, and I own that house. Have owned it since 1987. He held up the keys, letting them jingle softly. "And I've been watching your family rent it all these years. But more importantly, I've been watching you." My heart stopped. "Watching me? Every summer, you're the one who cleans up after everyone else. You're the one who fixes the broken screen door, who replaces the burnt-out light bulbs, who makes sure the place is spotless before you all leave. You're the one who treats my property like it's your own home." He paused, glancing back toward the house. "They treat it like a hotel." I didn't know what to say. The keys in his hand seemed to glow in the fading sunlight. "I've made a decision," Robert said quietly. "I'm getting too old to manage rental properties. My children live in California, and they want me to sell this place. But I can't bear the thought of it going to developers who'll tear it down for condos." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I've been looking for the right person to give it to. Someone who understands what this place really means." From the lake house, I heard Claire's voice calling out, "More wine." Sarah always brought the wine, but I guess we'll have to make do without her contributions. Robert heard it too. His jaw tightened slightly. "Miss," he said, extending the keys toward me, "I don't know your name, but I know your heart. This house has been watching you love it for 15 years. Now it's time for it to love you back." I stared at the keys, my mind reeling. "I don't understand. You want to sell it to me? I'm a nurse. I don't have that kind of money." "I'm not selling it to you," Robert said firmly. "I'm giving it to you, free and clear. The deed will be in your name by Monday morning." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Behind me, My family continued their celebration, completely unaware that everything had just changed. The house they'd just kicked me out of, the house where they'd told me I didn't belong, was about to become mine. Robert pressed the keys into my palm, and they felt warm, as if they'd been waiting for me all along. I stood there holding the keys, feeling their weight like I was holding someone's entire life story. The metal was warm from Robert's weathered hands, and I could hear my pulse in my ears louder than the distant laughter from the lake house. "I can't accept this," I whispered, but even as I said it, something deep inside me was already reaching for those keys like a drowning person reaches for shore. Robert shook his head gently. "Miss, I've been watching families come and go for decades. I've seen how people treat places that don't belong to them. But you," he gestured toward the house where my family was now sitting up for dinner, completely oblivious to our conversation. "You water the flowers in the window boxes. You oil the squeaky hinges. Last summer, I watched you spend your own money to replace the broken porch swing. I remembered that swing." Claire had been upset that it was too rusty and embarrassing for her Instagram photos. I'd driven to the hardware store in town and spent $200 of my grocery money on a new one, staying up until midnight to install it by flashlight. "They don't even know you did that, do they?" Robert asked softly. I shook my head. They'd posed on that swing the next morning, taking dozens of photos, never asking where it had come from. My late wife Martha used to say that houses choose their people, not the other way around. Robert's voice carried the weight of old grief and older wisdom. "This house has been choosing you for 15 years. I'm just finally listening to what it's been trying to tell me." A cool breeze came off the lake, carrying the scent of pine and barbecue smoke. I could hear my mother's voice drifting over. "It's actually quite peaceful without all the drama. Sarah always brought such heavy energy to these gatherings." Heavy energy. I thought about all the years I'd driven here straight from double shifts at the hospital, bringing homemade potato salad and wine I couldn't afford, staying up late to clean the kitchen while everyone else slept off their hangovers. Heavy energy. "There's something else," Robert said, pulling a folded envelope from his shirt pocket. "This came for you 3 days ago. Addressed to Sarah Henderson. At this address." I took the envelope with trembling fingers. My name was written in elegant script across the front, but the return address made my breath catch. It was from Morrison, Klein and Associates, the law firm that had handled my adoption. How did they? I started to ask, but Robert was already walking away. "The house has been waiting for you to come home," he called back. "Maybe it's time you learned why." I stood alone in the gravel driveway, holding keys to a house worth at least $500,000 and a letter that might contain answers to questions I'd been afraid to ask my entire life. From the lake house, I could hear my family's voices growing louder as the wine flowed, their conversation punctuated by bursts of laughter that no longer included me. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Sarah, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. We've talked about this as a family, and we think it's best if you find your own traditions. You're 29 now. Time to build your own life. Build your own life." As if I hadn't been trying to build one with them for 29 years. I looked down at the keys in my palm, then at the letter from the law firm. The sun was setting behind the pine trees, casting long shadows across the water. In the golden light, the lake house looked different somehow, not like the place where I'd been rejected, but like the place where I'd been chosen. I walked to the front door, my bare feet silent on the wooden porch I'd swept 100 times. The key slid into the lock like it had been made for my hand. Inside, everything was exactly as I remembered: the stone fireplace where I'd built countless fires, the kitchen where I'd cooked countless meals, the windows I'd cleaned until they sparkled. But now it was mine. Every creaking floorboard, every water stain on the ceiling, every perfect imperfection. Mine. I sat down on the couch where I'd spent so many evenings reading while my family played cards, and carefully opened the envelope. The letterhead was crisp and official, but the words swam before my eyes as I tried to process what I was reading. "Dear Miss Henderson," it began. "We are writing to inform you that our firm has been authorized to release information regarding your biological family, as per the terms of a trust established in 1995. My hands shook as I continued reading. There had been money. A trust fund, set up by my birth mother before she died, meant to be released to me on my 30th birthday. But there was more: a property deed. a bank account, and a letter that had been sealed for 29 years. The law firm had been trying to reach me for months, but every letter sent to my apartment had been returned. They'd finally traced me here, to the address where I'd been spending my summers, the address my adoptive family used for their annual reservations. I thought about my mother's words. The invitation was a mistake. Mom meant to send it to your address by accident. It hadn't been an accident. The universe had been trying to bring me here, to this moment, to these keys, to this letter. And my family had tried to stop it from happening. Outside, I heard car doors slamming. Through the window, I watched my cousin Mark loading coolers into his SUV. They were leaving early, cutting their weekend short, without me there to clean up, to mediate their arguments, to smooth over their rough edges. The magic had apparently worn thin. Claire's voice carried across the water. I don't know why we kept including her for so long. It's not like she's really one of us. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the coffee table next to the keys. Tomorrow, I would call the law firm. Tomorrow, I would learn about the mother who had loved me enough to leave me everything she had. Tomorrow, I would begin to understand why I'd never quite fit into the family that had raised me. But tonight, I would sit in my house, and listen to the lake water lapping against the shore. Tonight, I would finally be home. The last car door slammed shut, and I heard engines starting. Through the window, I watched the taillights of my family's cars disappearing down the winding road, leaving me alone with the keys to my inheritance and the silence I'd been craving my entire life. For the first time in 29 years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like possibility. The house settled around me as darkness fell, its familiar creaks and sighs like a lullaby I'd been hearing my whole life without realizing it was meant for me. I made myself a cup of tea using the chip mug I'd always claimed from the kitchen cabinet, the one with the faded lake scene that no one else ever wanted. Now I understood why it had always felt like mine. I called in sick to work for Monday, something I'd never done in 5 years of nursing. My supervisor, Janet, was surprised. "Sarah, you never take time off. Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm more than okay," I said, and for the first time in months, it was true. The next morning, I drove into town to Morrison, Klein and Associates, still wearing yesterday's clothes, still carrying the keys Robert had given me like a talisman. The law office was smaller than I'd expected, tucked between a bakery and a used bookstore on Main Street. Margaret Morrison was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked at me like she'd been waiting for this meeting her entire career. "Sarah," she said, standing up from behind her desk, "you look exactly like her." "Like who?" "Your mother, Elena Chen." The name hit me like a physical blow. Chen, like Robert Chen, the man who'd given me the keys. Margaret must have seen the recognition in my eyes. "Yes. Robert is your grandfather. Your mother's father. He's been watching over you all these years, waiting for the right moment." I sank into the chair across from her desk, my mind reeling. He knew. He knew who I was. Elena made him promise to let you find your own way first. She wanted you to be raised by the family who adopted you, to have that experience. But she also wanted to make sure you'd have choices when you turned 30. Margaret pulled out a thick file. She was very specific about the timing. "Why 30? She said that's when she finally understood who she really was, separate from everyone else's expectations. She wanted to give you the same opportunity." Margaret opened the file and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in the same elegant script I'd seen on the lawyer's letter. "She wrote this for you when you were 6 months old, just before she died. Cancer. She was only 22. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Inside was a letter written on cream-colored paper, the ink slightly faded but still clear. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you've found your way home to the lake house. I hope it's been a place of peace for you. Even if you didn't know it was yours." I had to stop reading for a moment, overwhelmed by the voice of a mother I'd never known speaking to me across 3 decades. "I'm writing this knowing I won't be there to guide you through life, but I want you to know that every decision I made was out of love. I chose your adoptive family carefully. They seemed kind, stable, the kind of people who could give you opportunities I never could. But I also knew there might come a time when you need to know where you really came from. The letter went on to explain that Elena had inherited the lake house from her own grandmother, that it had been in the Chan family for generations. She'd put it in a trust with specific instructions. If I ever spent significant time there, if I showed that I loved and cared for the place, it would become mine on my 30th birthday. I hope you understand that love isn't always about blood, the letter continued. Sometimes the family that raises you and the family you're born to can both be real, both be important. But sometimes you have to choose which one truly sees you for who you are. At the bottom of the letter was a postscript that made my breath catch. Please, if you're reading this at the lake house, look under the loose floorboard by the fireplace. I left something there for you. Margaret was watching me with gentle eyes. There's more, Sarah. The trust your mother set up, it's substantial. Enough for you to never work again if you choose, or to do whatever work brings you joy instead of just paying bills. She slid a bank statement across the desk. The number at the bottom had so many zeros I had to count them twice. How? I whispered. Your mother was brilliant. She invested in tech stocks in the early 90s, right before the boom. She had a gift for seeing potential where others saw risk. Margaret smiled. She also left instructions that if you became a nurse, an additional amount should be added to the trust. She somehow knew you'd choose a profession about caring for others. I thought about all the years I'd worked double shifts, all the times I'd chosen generic groceries to afford the wine I brought to family gatherings, all the nights I'd fallen asleep exhausted in my tiny apartment. My birth mother had been watching over me even in death, making sure I'd have choices I'd never known existed. There's one more thing, Margaret said. Your grandfather Robert wanted me to give you this. She handed me another envelope, this one sealed with wax. Inside was a short note in Robert's careful handwriting. Sarah, I've been waiting 30 years to welcome you home. Your mother made me promise to let you choose your own path first, but she also made me promise to be here when you were ready. The lake house has been yours in every way that matters since the day you first walked through its doors. Now it's yours legally too. Welcome to the family you were always meant to have. Grandfather, I drove back to the lake house in a daze, my car loaded with legal documents that would change everything. The trust papers, the deed transfer, the bank account information, all of it felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. But when I pulled into the driveway and saw the house waiting for me in the afternoon light, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I found the loose floorboard exactly where my mother's letter had described. Underneath was a small wooden box, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. Inside were photographs of my mother as a young woman, standing on the very porch where I now stood. Pictures of her painting the shutters, planting the garden, sitting by the lake with a book. At the bottom of the box was one more letter, shorter this time. Sarah, if you're reading this, it means you've chosen love over obligation, truth over comfort. The lake house isn't just a place, it's a reminder that some things are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in even when the world tells you otherwise. You are worth all of that and more. Love, Mom. I sat on the porch as the sun set, holding my mother's photographs and thinking about the family that had raised me. They weren't evil people, just people who had never learned to see past their own reflections. They'd given me structure, education, opportunities, but they'd never given me the one thing my birth mother had left me, the knowledge that I was enough, exactly as I was. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Mom wants to know if you're going to keep being dramatic about this weekend. We're planning next year's trip and need to know if you're going to be mature about the family decision. I looked at the keys in my hand, then at the lake stretching out before me like a promise. I typed back, I won't be joining you next year. I'll be busy hosting my own family gathering. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I didn't try to make them understand. Instead, I called Robert. Grandfather, I said when he answered, testing the word on my tongue. Sarah. His voice was warm with unshed tears. How does it feel to be home? Like I've been holding my breath for 29 years and can finally exhale. Your mother would be so proud. She always said you'd know what to do when the time came. We talked until the stars came out. About Elena, about the lake house, about the family I'd never known I had. He told me stories about my mother's childhood, about her dreams, about the way she'd loved this place with the same fierce tenderness I'd always felt but never understood. When I finally hung up, the house was quiet around me. But it wasn't the terrible silence of rejection I'd known my whole life. It was the peaceful silence of belonging, of being exactly where I was meant to be. I made myself dinner in my kitchen, slept in my bed, and woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through my windows. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to earn my place or prove my worth or apologize for taking up space. I was home. The first week passed like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. I took vacation time from the hospital, something I'd never done without a specific family obligation, and spent my days learning the rhythms of the house. I discovered that the kitchen window caught the morning light perfectly for reading, that the back bedroom stayed cool even on the hottest afternoons, and that the dock was the ideal place to watch storms roll across the lake. Robert came by every evening, bringing stories and old photo albums. We'd sit on the porch swing I'd bought and installed, and he'd tell me about my mother's childhood, about the summers she'd spent here before I was born. She used to say this place had magic in it, he said one evening, pointing to a photograph of Elena sitting by the lake with the easel and paintbrush. She'd paint for hours, trying to capture the way the light changed on the water, never quite satisfied with the results, but never willing to give up trying. I studied the photograph. My mother looked so young, so hopeful. What happened to her paintings? They're in the attic. She made me promise to save them for you. Robert's eyes twinkled. Along with a few other surprises, the next morning, I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, flashlight in hand. The space was larger than I'd expected, with dormer windows that let in streams of dusty sunlight. In the corner, covered by old sheets, I found them dozens of canvases, all depicting the lake in different seasons, different moods, different moments of beauty. But it was what I found next that made me sink to my knees on the dusty floor. A baby crib, painted white with tiny flowers along the rails. Next to it, a rocking chair with a faded cushion. And on the chair, a journal bound in soft leather. I opened it with trembling hands. The first entry was dated just after my birth, March 15th, 1995. I held Sarah today for what I know will be the last time before the adoption is finalized. She has the most serious little face, like she's already trying to figure out the world. I want to keep her so badly it physically hurts, but I know I can't give her what she needs. The Hendersons seem like good people. They have money, stability, a big house in the suburbs. Everything I can't provide. I flipped through the pages, reading my mother's hopes and fears, her detailed research into my adoptive family, her careful planning for my future. April 2nd, 1995. I've decided to buy the lake house back from Dad. He's been renting it out since Mom died, but I want Sarah to have a place that's truly hers someday. Somewhere she can come when she needs to remember that she's loved, even if she doesn't know it yet. June 10th, 1995. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months. I'm not afraid for myself, but I'm terrified for Sarah. What if she grows up feeling like she doesn't belong anywhere? What if the Hendersons never tell her how wanted she was? I have to trust that love finds a way, even across time. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before Elena died. November 28th, 1995. I've finished all the legal arrangements. The trust, the house, the letters. Dad thinks I'm being overly complicated, but I need to know that Sarah will have choices. Real choices. I've watched too many adopted children grow up feeling like they owe their families everything, like they can never be enough to repay the debt of being wanted. I don't want that for my daughter. I want her to know that love isn't something you earn, it's something you deserve simply by existing. I closed the journal and sat in the dusty silence, crying for the mother I'd never known and the love I'd carried without understanding its source. Elena had seen into the future with startling clarity. She'd known I would struggle with feeling like I belonged, known I would need a place that was mine without conditions. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my supervisor from the hospital. "Sarah, I hate to bother you on vacation, but we've had a situation. Mrs. Patterson in room 314 is asking for you specifically. She's not doing well, and she says you're the only nurse who really listens to her." Mrs. Patterson was 93, sharp as a tack, and completely alone in the world. Her family had stopped visiting months ago, claiming she was too difficult to deal with. I'd been spending extra time with her during my shifts, bringing her books from the hospital library and listening to her stories about the 1950s. "I'll be there in 2 hours," I said without hesitation. Robert was working in the garden when I came downstairs with my car keys. "Everything all right?" I told him about Mrs. Patterson, about how she reminded me of the elderly patients who had no one, about how I'd always felt drawn to the forgotten ones. "Your mother was the same way," he said, straightening up from the tomato plants. "Always bringing home stray animals, people, anyone who needed care. She used to say that being unwanted teaches you to recognize it in others." I drove to the hospital thinking about that phrase. Being unwanted teaches you to recognize it in others. It explains so much about my career choice, about why I'd always gravitated toward the patients other nurses found difficult or demanding. Mrs. Patterson was awake when I arrived, her thin hand clutching a tissue. "Sarah, dear, I was hoping you'd come. I wanted to tell you something before." "Well, before it's too late." I sat beside her bed and took her hand. "What is it, Mrs. Patterson? I've been watching you these past few months, how you care for people. You have a gift, child. Not just for nursing, but for seeing people who feel invisible." She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "I've been alone for a long time, but you made me feel like I mattered. That's not something they teach in nursing school." She passed away peacefully that evening, with me holding her hand. Her lawyer contacted me the next day with a surprise. Mrs. Patterson had left me a small inheritance and a note for the nurse who saw me when everyone else looked away. "Use this to help others who are forgotten." Driving back to the lake house, I thought about the strange symmetry of it all. 2 women, both alone, both leaving me gifts that would change my life. Elena had given me a place to belong. Mrs. Patterson had given me a purpose that went beyond just paying bills. That night, I sat on the dock with my mother's journal and watched the stars reflect on the water. I thought about the family that had raised me, probably planning next year's lake house rental at some other property, never knowing that their rejection had led me to my true inheritance. I wasn't angry anymore. I felt something deeper than anger. Something that felt almost like gratitude. Their inability to see me for who I really was had freed me to discover who I was meant to become. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother Mark. "Mom's been asking about you. She feels bad about how things ended at the lake. Maybe we could all get together for dinner sometime." I looked at the message for a long time, then at the house behind me, my house, filled with my mother's paintings and my grandfather's stories and the promise of a future I was finally free to choose. I typed back, "I appreciate that, but I'm building something new now. I hope you all find what you're looking for." Then I turned off my phone and listened to the lake water lapping against the dock, to the wind moving through the pine trees, to the sound of a life finally beginning at 29 years old. Tomorrow, I would start planning how to use Mrs. Patterson's gift and my mother's trust to create something meaningful. A foundation maybe, or a program for elderly patients who had no family. Something that would honor both women who had seen value in me when others couldn't. But tonight, I would simply sit in the silence of belonging, surrounded by the love of people who had chosen me across time and death and distance, and finally understand what home was supposed to feel like. The stars wheeled overhead, and the lake house settled around me like an embrace I'd been waiting my whole life to receive. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where Claire had told me I didn't belong, watching a different kind of family gathering unfold on the lawn. The Forgotten Angels Foundation was hosting its first annual fundraiser, and the lake house was alive with a warmth I'd never experienced during those sterile summer rentals. Mrs. Chen had discovered she was my grandmother's sister. Another relative I'd never known existed was setting up a display of Elena's paintings. We were auctioning them to raise money for the foundation's hospice companion program. Watching strangers bid enthusiastically on my mother's art felt like watching her dreams finally come true. "Sarah, the photographer from the local paper wants to interview you," called Marcus, a young social worker who'd become my closest friend and the foundation's volunteer coordinator. He'd been one of Mrs. Patterson's former patients too, someone else she'd seen when the world looked away. I smoothed down my dress, a simple blue sundress I'd bought with my own money for the first time in years. Not because I had to save every penny, but because I wanted to look like myself. The financial freedom Elena's trust had given me was still surreal, but I was learning to accept abundance the same way I'd learned to accept love, as something I deserved simply by existing. The reporter was a woman about my age with kind eyes and a digital recorder. "Miss Chen," she said, and I still felt a small thrill at hearing my birth name, which I'd legally changed to honor both my mothers. "Can you tell us how this foundation came about?" I looked around at the scene, elderly volunteers from the community sharing stories with younger visitors, Robert teaching a group of children how to skip stones, the gentle buzz of conversation that felt nothing like the forced cheer of my adoptive family's gatherings. It started with understanding that being forgotten isn't a failure of the person who's forgotten, I said. It's a failure of the systems that are supposed to care for them. My mother left me this house, but more importantly, she left me the understanding that love doesn't have to be earned. Sometimes people just need someone to sit with them and remind them they matter. The reporter scribbled notes. "And the connection to your adoptive family?" I understand there was some tension there. I'd been dreading this question, but when it came, I felt only peace. They gave me structure and education and opportunities. I'm grateful for that. But they also taught me, unintentionally, what it feels like to not quite fit. That experience helps me recognize it in others now. What I didn't tell the reporter was that my mother had called 3 weeks ago. Not to apologize exactly, but to ask if I might consider letting bygones be bygones and rejoining the family for holidays. Claire had gotten engaged, apparently, and they wanted a full family photo for the wedding announcements. "We miss having you around to help with things," Mom had said, and I'd realized she still didn't understand. She missed my labor, my mediation, my willingness to smooth over their rough edges. She didn't miss me. "I hope you have a beautiful wedding," I told her. "But I'm building my own traditions now." The fundraiser continued into the evening, and as the sun set over the lake, I found myself standing on the dock where this whole journey had begun. The same dock where Claire had told me to leave, where Robert had handed me the keys that changed everything. "Penny, for your thoughts." Robert appeared beside me, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the house. "I was thinking about that day," I said, accepting the warm mug. "When you gave me the keys, did you know what would happen?" Robert smiled, his weathered face creasing with affection. "Elena always said you'd know what to do when the time came. She was right about most things." "Most things?" "She worried you might be too forgiving, too willing to keep trying to fit where you weren't wanted." He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "She underestimated your strength." Behind us, the fundraiser was winding down. Volunteers were cleaning up, counting donations, making plans for next month's companion visits to the nursing home. The foundation had raised enough money tonight to fund a full year of programming, but more importantly, it had created a community of people who understood what it meant to be seen. "There's something I want to show you," Robert said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This came yesterday." The return address made my breath catch. Henderson Family Trust. Inside was a formal letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. "Dear Miss Chen," it began, "we represent the Henderson family regarding a property dispute. It has come to our attention that you may be in possession of a lake house that was traditionally used by our clients for family gatherings. We would like to discuss a reasonable compensation for your vacation of the premises." I read the letter twice, then started laughing. They want to buy the house from me? Apparently they've been trying to rent it from other owners for months, but nothing compares to this place. Claire's fiancé is quite wealthy, from what I hear, and they want to have their wedding here. The irony was exquisite. They'd kicked me out of a house that was already mine, and now they wanted to pay me to get it back. "What are you going to do?" Robert asked. I looked at the house glowing with warm light, at the people inside who had become my chosen family, at the lake that had witnessed my transformation from unwanted daughter to woman who knew her own worth. "I'm going to frame this letter," I said, "and then I'm going to send them a very polite response explaining that the house isn't for sale, but they're welcome to attend our next fundraiser if they'd like to contribute to a good cause." Robert chuckled. "Elena would have loved that." As the last guests departed and the volunteers finished cleaning up, I walked through my house, truly my house now, in every sense that mattered. In the living room, Elena's paintings had been rehung after the auction, the ones that hadn't sold, becoming a permanent gallery of my mother's love. In the kitchen, the chipped mug I'd always claimed sat in the place of honor on the counter. In the bedroom, Mrs. Patterson's quilt covered the bed where I slept peacefully every night. I sat down at the desk in the corner, Elena's desk, where she'd written my letters and planned my future, and pulled out a piece of cream-colored paper. At the top, I wrote, "Letter to my future daughter, if I'm lucky enough to have one. My darling girl," I began. "If you're reading this, it means I've learned something about love that I want to pass on to you. Love isn't something you earn by being perfect or useful or convenient. Love isn't something you have to apologize for taking up space to receive. Love is something you deserve simply because you exist, because you are exactly who you're meant to be." I wrote about Elena, about Robert, about Mrs. Patterson, about the family that had raised me and the family I'd chosen. I wrote about the difference between belonging and fitting in, about the courage it takes to walk away from people who can't see your worth, about the magic that happens when you finally come home to yourself. When I finished, I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it in Elena's wooden box, next to her photographs and journals. Someday, maybe, I would have a daughter to give it to. Or maybe I would give it to one of the forgotten children who came through the Foundation's programs, someone who needed to know that families can be built from love instead of obligation. Outside, the lake was perfectly still, reflecting the stars like scattered diamonds. I made myself a cup of tea in my favorite mug and sat on the porch swing, listening to the night sounds of my home. My phone was silent. I'd learned to turn it off in the evenings, to protect this sacred time from the demands of the outside world. Tomorrow there would be work to do, programs to plan, people to help. But tonight there was just this, the peace of being exactly where I belonged, surrounded by the love of people who had chosen me across time and space and every obstacle the world could create. I thought about Claire's upcoming wedding, about the family photos that would be taken without me, about the traditions that would continue in my absence. I felt no sadness, no sense of loss. I felt only gratitude for the rejection that had set me free to find my real family, my real purpose, my real home. The lake house settled around me with its familiar creaks and sighs, and I finally understood what Elena had known when she was my age, that some kinds of love are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in even when the world tells you otherwise. I was worth all of that and more. And now, finally, I knew it too.